I like to say that I am a proud, I am a patriotic, and these days I am a pissed off American citizen. Oh good, I like to get that reaction to that line, because I think that we as progressives make a mistake if we allow the Tea Party to claim some sort of monopoly on righteous anger. Because, you know, if you have a conversation with Tea Party adherents, and I do, and you get down to the brass tacks, I mean, like, why are you angry? What I mostly hear from them, I'm angry at the fact that Wall Street America destroyed the economy of the United States and the federal government rewarded them with $1 trillion. Well, you know what? I'm angry about that too. Aren't you?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
We're angry about that. And as a progressive, I also want to point out that I'm also angry about the fact that 25% of the children in this country go to bed hungry. And I don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. I'm also angry about the fact that 1 in 6 families are living in poverty in the United States. And I don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. I'm also angry about the fact that the global climate crisis is being ignored by the leadership of both political parties. I damn sure don't hear that at Tea Party rallies, and I'll go one step further. I'm angry about the fact that the United States of America is a fundamentally racist, sexist, and class-oppressive society. And I don't hear that anger expressed at Tea Party rallies. And I want to say something, folks. That kind of anger that I'm talking about, the kind of anger that I'm getting from your feedback to this very conversation, I want to call that righteous anger. Because it is righteous to be angry about injustice and about oppression. And frankly, it was righteous anger that drove the abolitionist movement. It was righteous anger that drove those women at Seneca Falls to stand up against patriarchy. It was righteous anger that drove the trade union movement. Righteous anger fueled the civil rights movement. Righteous anger is a good thing. Because you see, righteous anger is not just getting mad. Because if you just get mad and stew in it, that is a dangerous thing. It's dangerous emotionally, psychologically, physically, spiritually. Righteous anger means that you have to act. You have to act. And that's what I am so excited about as I travel around the country on behalf of Move to Amend and to be speaking at Occupy sites all across the country and in church halls and community centers and labor temples and anywhere where people are gathering to have these kinds of workshops. What we're seeing is a kind of anger that is being fueled is fueling a movement that is committing itself to nonviolent action for systemic change. That's what Move to Amend is all about. And what we're all about is taking on, head on, the linchpins for how the ruling elite have basically hijacked not only our government, but our political process and our legal system as well. You know, I come from a background, I'm a lawyer, I practiced law for over a decade, and I learned a lot of different things. And what I learned is that the legal system is not actually designed to administer justice. It's designed to perpetuate the existing system, right? And so if, like me, you believe that the current system is racist, sexist, class oppressive, and is destroying the planet, then we've got a problem. And so what I'm going to do in this short amount of time we've got together is make sure to cover 4 basic concepts. The first concept is the word democracy. That word gets thrown around a lot, so to make sure we've got some clarity, somebody tell me what language that's from.
Greek.
It's from Greek. Let's break that word down. Demos means?
People.
The people. Kratia means? You know?
Government.
The people rule, or govern, or power. So let's just say the people rule. That's what the word democracy means. How many folks believe we, the people, are actually ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. I do this presentation all across the country. It is rare that anybody ever actually raises their hand. And folks, that's a problem. And I say this carefully, I think it's a good thing. It's not a good thing that we don't rule, but it's a good thing that we are finally disabusing ourselves of the notion that we do. Because we have been taught to believe that we the people are sovereign, that we the people rule. We've been taught that this is a functioning democracy. And I got to tell you something, folks. I think it's time for us to come to terms with the fact the most dangerous threat to democracy in the United States of America is the mistaken belief that we actually practice one. We've actually got to come to terms with the reality that we're dealing with so that we can design the appropriate plan and then implement that plan. That'll bring me to the next big concept, which is sovereignty. Can anybody give me a quick couple of word definition of sovereignty? How about this? If I said sovereign or the sovereign, who or what would you think of?
The ruler, the king.
The king. That's because 500 years ago, the sovereign was the king. They had become synonymous. And so because the word sovereignty means, as you said, the authority to rule. So whoever has the authority to rule is the sovereign. And as you said, the king 500 years ago was the sovereign. The king had authority to rule. And where 500 years ago did the king claim his sovereignty? Where did he? God! You don't get more legitimate. Right? I mean, if you can say that your power to rule comes from God on high, that's something. To prove that, to illustrate that, we're going to do a little exercise that is always a lot of fun for me. You'll see. I'm going to ask everybody to close your eyes and repeat after me. David Cobb is the king.
David Cobb is the king.
I told you it would be fun for me. And as the king, David is God's representative on earth.
And as the king, David is God's representative on earth.
And therefore, everything David says must be obeyed.
And therefore, everything David says must be obeyed.
Okay, for those of you who are closing your eyes through the bitter end, open them now. Let's make a couple of quick observations. All of you chuckled about that, right? As soon as this gentleman saw what I was doing, he went from smiling and like leaning forward and listening to me to smirking at me, right? You know you did. You were shaking your head no. The brother in the very back literally cried. He's still doing it. He crossed his arms. Right? I mean, the immediate reaction that all of you gave to that was a function of the fact that that was stupid, what I just said. Right? I mean, that's funny. And not funny in the, ooh, what a droll comment David Cobb has just made. No, it's funny in that that's what we call ludicrous humor. Right? It's ridiculous. To say that I should have the power to tell you how to live your life simply because of who my parents are, or even better, how all of society ought to operate simply because of my birth, that's ridiculous. That is funny. That's humorous. And 500 years ago, people just like you not only thought it, but they said it. And if they didn't believe it, they knew better than to say otherwise. The reason I go down make this point so crystal clear, we have to come to terms with this reality. If enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it's true. Literally, folks, and here the Texans going to get metaphysical on y'all, so hold on. We are all jointly participating in creating our reality. And that really is so powerful. And the reason that I want to really underscore this point is because you can't even talk about the divine right of kings or sovereignty without laughing and chuckling about it. And 500 years ago, it was reality. And 500 years is a snap of the finger in historic time. You know, I'm proud to say that I'm a Green Party member, and I'm proud to say I work with progressive Democrats day in and day out. And I'm proud to tell you I have a history of working with Republicans on issues where we can find common ground. I work with anarchists and socialists. You know, I have a long history of working in solidarity and coalition with folks who may not actually share all of my ideas. Let me tell you something. In my long history of organizing, I've never had the privilege or the opportunity to work with a monarchist. Right? I mean, it's not even part of our imagination to even imagine that. And 500 years ago, you couldn't imagine anything different. The reason I say this is for those people who are saying it's not possible to create the world that we want, you know, one based on peace and justice and democracy and ecological sustainability, I tell you, those people are wrong. And it is our job, yes, you can applaud that, those people are wrong. And I say that because I believe that it is our job to continue to open imagination space and to make what seems impossible inevitable. That's what our job is. And the next concept I want to make sure that we cover is legal personhood. And this concept, by the way, simply means the ability to assert rights. See, if you have the ability to assert rights, that means you're a legal person. And this concept has been at the core of many struggles in the United States of America. The last concept I want to cover is corporation. And because it's such an important concept, I'll ask the same question. What language is this from? It's from Latin. Can we break it down? Corpus means body. And now for my Latin scholars, the suffix tion, it means the state of having, or to have, or to be. So literally, when you break down the word corporation, it means to have or give body. And by body, I mean literal physical sense. And that's because the word corporation is from Latin, because the first corporations ever created were created during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we spent more time asking, what happens when a country devolved from being a republic to an empire? Because that might be an important conversation in the United States of America. Just saying. But let's get right down to it. The Roman corporations, why were they created at all? Well, in order to do things. For example, the road system. Y'all heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Those roads were literally built by and maintained by a Roman corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula, a Roman corporation. The first universities that we would understand, university comes from Latin as well, because the first universities were actually built by and administered under the auspices of a corporation. The first hospitals, can you guess? Corporation. So very quickly, folks, what does a road system, a water system, a university, a hospital, what do they all have in common?
They serve the people.
They serve the people. All of these are public infrastructure. The genius of the corporation is to do a public infrastructure project with private money or material or effort. And I want to be clear about this. There are other ways that the government takes private money for public uses, right? What do we normally think of when we think of private money being taken by the government?
Taxes.
Taxes. The difference between this idea of the Roman corporation and the taxes is this. Your name is Tom, is that right?
Tom's up there. I'm Hal.
Tom and Hal. Hal. Got you over here, Hal. So, when the Roman centurion shows up, does the Roman centurion ask you if you'd be willing to pay your tax?
No.
Right? The tax system is mandatory, right? The genius of the corporation is that it takes private money on a voluntary basis and puts it to a public use. And that might be by asking for just a donation. Would you please be willing to give money because this is really an important thing? More often than not, though, it's can we entice you to invest in this public project? We'll allow you some amount of money to be returned on it, but we're making it a win-win proposition. The genius of the idea of the corporation in its first inception was to take private voluntary money in a voluntary manner and to put it to some public use. And I want to say again, that is a genius idea. The idea of actually facilitating different public projects, that is something very important. David Cobb is not anti-corporation. Move to Amend is not anti-corporation. There are appropriate places for the corporate form to be operating. Of course, the problem is that the modern transnational corporation doesn't exactly operate this way, does it?
No.
That's because the modern transnational corporation, as we currently understand it, actually comes out of the 14th, 15th, and 16th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. I have to put discovery in quotation marks because really the 14th, 15th century, that wasn't the age of discovery. After all, what did they discover? Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash, there were people living there. They weren't lost. They didn't need to be discovered. And so let's just be really clear. This is the age of empire. It is the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. That's what imperialism means. To literally steal other people's stuff and to take it for your own, right? And here's the kicker. The modern transnational corporation was created as an instrument of imperialism. It was literally created in order to privatize the creation of empires and to profit from it. And in fact, one of the earliest corporations, joint stock companies of modern times, was an outfit called the East India Company, which was literally designed to facilitate the subjugation, domination of the entire subcontinent of India, and then to steal the resources back away, and not only to conquer them in the military sense, but to erase their memory of what freedom was like, and to make them dependent upon the new European British institutions. In other words, not just to colonize their bodies, but to colonize their minds. And let me tell you something. I think a big problem in the United States of America today is so many of us, myself included, are victims of colonization. The reality is that we are subjected constantly to a stream of consumerism, materialism, a constant stream of thinly veiled racist white supremacy where we don't even see it. It's constantly bombarding us. And I got to tell you something, that a true liberation movement has got to come to terms with how subtle it is, but how devastatingly effective the colonization is. And frankly, I got a big shout out to the Occupy movement, because one of the most important things that I'm experiencing personally, and I'm watching other people experience, is actual conversation around things that matter without the filters. Right? We're learning to actually talk to one another and actually make and implement decisions in a democratic fashion. And all sorts of beautiful, wonderful things are coming as a result of it. No wonder the ruling elite is scared witless about what's going on. Right?
Witless.
Witless. How's that for a rhyming way to keep it clean? I'll let y'all figure that one out. Another, of course, of the early corporations was a little outfit called the Africa Trading Company. Would anybody like to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded?
Slaves.
Humans.
Say it again.
Humans.
Thank you, sister, for saying that, because I want to tell you, and I'll use myself as an example, when in my head the answer to that question pops up, slaves, I will own that's an example of my own colonized mind. Because we're taught to think that. That's the story that we've been told. But damn it, the Africa Trading Company did not trade slaves. Africa was not populated by slaves. Africa was populated by humans, people. And may I say, people basically just like me. And I say that knowing full well my own pigment, but I say it because it's important for us to recognize that race does not exist. Certainly skin color exists and ethnicity exists, but you ask any biologist, you ask any scientist, and they will tell you that these differences do not raise to a taxonomy. It doesn't make any sense. But check it out. Race doesn't exist, but racism damn sure does. How can that possibly be? Why, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true,
it is true.
It is true. And so here's the thing. The reason that I want to make this point, especially as a white person, I think it's important for us to really understand historically that just as a corporation is a construct, that it gets created by the human mind, race got created by the human mind, and it was created at the same time period for basically the same type of reason, and that is to justify slavery. Now I want to be clear about something. Slavery pre-existed the 14th century. But that slavery was different. Let's say that Hal and I belong to different tribes. There's a river separating us, and my tribe goes to war against Hal's tribe, and my tribe wins this war. And by the way, why might my tribe win this war? Any suggestions or guesses? Why might my tribe win a war?
Your tribe's larger people.
I've got larger, more people.
Better weapons.
Better weapons.
Shoes.
Better
Better
land.
tech,
Say it again?
better
Shoes.
technology.
Shoes!
Because you believe God's on your side.
Because I believe God is on my side. You had one?
Better technology.
Better technology.
Better tech.
All of those are fantastic guesses, but based on the very limited information I've given you, you know those are all just guesses, right?
Sure.
Shall I tell you why my tribe wins the war? Because I'm telling the story.
Right.
Ah! I think it's really important for us to really come to terms with whoever is telling the story has inordinate amount of power. And that's why, again, the fact that the Occupy movement is learning to tell our own stories, and we're learning to shut off the filter of what the ruling elite story is, another very powerful thing, right? Unfortunately, Hal, in this example, I am telling the story, so my tribe wins. I put a spear up against Hal's throat, and I say, Hal, you're now my slave. Let me ask y'all, What is the philosophical justification for David to enslave Hal in this example?
Bible.
Get a spear.
Power. The spear. Nothing more, right? Check it out. I submit to you that the construct of race gets created during the 14th, 15th century in order to justify the depraved idea that you can enslave another human being for no other reason than skin color. It's obviously absurd, it's obviously stupid, and yet and still that construct gets created during this time period. And the reason I want to really go into this is to force us to confront the reality that the relationship between the transnational corporation, racism, and imperialism are inextricably linked. And in fact, I'm not the first American to say that, because one of the great American political thinkers and orators said that basically exactly the same thing. He said it in what is his best political speech, in my judgment. It's not his most famous speech, because his most famous speech is known as, "I have a dream." Who am I speaking of? Martin Luther King Jr. Isn't it interesting that King, the King that we know is "I have a dream" that he delivered at the mall in Washington, D.C. during that phenomenal rally. And it is a beautiful speech, and it deserves to be known and studied. But for my money, the best king is not the king of the mall. Instead, it's the king of a small church in Harlem, the Riverside Church. It's known as Beyond War or Beyond Vietnam. And King in that speech said, as a man of faith, said, the United States of America is suffering a moral and spiritual decay because there are triple evils of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism that are destroying this country, preventing us from being the country that we deserve to be. And unless and until we come to terms with those, the decay will continue. And you know what, folks? King was right then, and he's right now. And isn't it interesting, by the way, that just before King was assassinated, what was he preparing to do? The Poor People's Campaign, bringing thousands of people to Washington, D.C. to encamp, to occupy Washington, D.C. May I suggest, sisters and brothers of the Occupy movement, that our historic legacy can be tied directly to Resurrection City. And what we should do, we owe it to ourselves as well as the King memory to understand that historic moment and to recognize and to pay appropriate homage to it, not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, but also to really understand that to occupy, to liberate is something that it has a proud tradition in the United States. And it can help us make the links between racism and economic injustice in a way that I think is critically important that we do today. Now, I go into this to make it clear that the Africa Trading Company as a corporation was created during this time period to really underscore, I'll say it again, the concept of racism, corporatism, and imperialism are inextricably linked. And if we're going to have a movement that is actually successful at creating the world that we need, we are going to have to be willing to confront racism as well as economic injustice. And one of the things that I'm seeing happen at Occupy movements that I'm personally very excited about is to actually hear white people begin to talk about race. And so I encourage you here in Rochester, New York, to make sure that that becomes one of the topics that you're grappling with as you're going through this process. There's a lot of work to do, but we can't forget that important piece. Now, let's bring this to modern times. I talked about how the Africa Trading Company actually was a corporation. Let's bring it now to the United States of America, and I'll ask this question. First, let's ask the easy question. How many original colonies in the United States?
13.
13. That was a gimme, right? So here's the real question. Of those 13 colonies, how many of them were corporations?
I think all of them.
It was a trick question, brother. You're right. They were all corporations. In this sense, the king had to create them or give body to them. I'm telling you, the king created Massachusetts. Now, some people might say, no, that's not true. Massachusetts was already there. But that's why it's a trick question. The land was there. The people who lived on the land right? The forest and the rivers and the fish and the deer and the birds. Physical reality was there, but Massachusetts wasn't there. That's because the king had to create it, and the king created Massachusetts through the use of a charter. A charter is the legal document used to create a corporation. And as an example, I'll illustrate this by creating Massachusetts, and therefore I'll be the king. And why might I be the king in this story? Because I'm telling the story. Good job. So I'll be the king, and so I will create Massachusetts. And now, Hal, it'll be good to sit where you're sitting because I'm going to make you the governor. Watch this. I hereby decree that the following physical area is now known as Massachusetts, and I claim ultimate sovereignty or the authority to rule. However, I'm not going to actually rule this land on the day-to-day, bother with the kind of governing. I mean, I'm the king. I've got other countries to dominate and other people to oppress, and, you know, I've got important kingly duties to do. So instead, I will appoint Hal to be my royal governor.
And I'll take from Boston to Niagara, as Massachusetts used to include.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So,
and now
my subjects.
I'm glad that you are understanding exactly the royal governor's job. You are the subjects. And get this. I'll quote directly from the original charter. I, the king, hereby appoint Hal to, quote, plant, to rule, and to govern these new lands in my name, on my behalf, in my interest, and on the interest of the shareholders of Massachusetts. Because you see, the king did not originally create the state of Massachusetts. Do you know what the king actually created?
Corporation.
The corporation, the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. Right? Think about it. So, like most of these, and tell me your name again, brother?
Me?
Yes.
Ed.
Ed, as Ed pointed out, these were all corporations. But here's the thing. Some of them were actually land grants, right? Most of the corporations were actually for-profit joint stock companies, which is basically a transnational corporation. So most of them were actually created as for-profit joint stock companies, right? And the idea of creating this corporation to exploit the resources and send the money back to the king is exactly how the East India Company operated, exactly as the Africa Trading Company operated, and it's exactly how the Massachusetts Bay Trading Colony worked, and the Virginia Company, and other of the big corporations. So I used to say, you know, the American revolutionaries were not merely calling for a more socially responsible king. So today maybe we should instead not just call for more socially responsible corporations, right? Maybe we should raise our aspirations a little higher. Because I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of collecting all the data that proves that these corporations are causing asthma, right? And then saying, so would you please change your practices? Or, here's all the data that shows cancer clusters where you're doing business, so would you please do your business differently? Or, British Petroleum, would you please not destroy the entire frigging Gulf of Mexico, right? I mean, is that really all we want? A little less death? A little less destruction? I mean, I think that, again, we've got to actually raise our aspirations and actually imagine what is it that we want. And what we want is something far more than just a little less oppression and a little less injustice, right? And so, we should actually recognize that. But I got to tell you something, folks. Those people who would become American revolutionaries, about 10 to 15 years before the revolution actually broke out, these people were begging the king. And it went something like this. Oh, dear Father King, we, your humble and obedient children, come before you on bended knee to ask that you intervene on our behalf. Because your royal governor is oppressing us mightily with unfair rules, trade rules, business rules that are unfairly privileging the East India Company. And so, Almighty King, we come before you and ask that you intervene on our behalf. It was the most sniveling, groveling language that you can imagine. And I don't know about you, but I am keenly interested in knowing what kind of conversations those people were having with one another, that in one generation, 10 to 15 years, they stopped the boot kissing. And they got up, and they stood up, and they put their shoulders back. As King would say in a different era, they found some steel for their backbone. They stood up straight, put their chin up, and looked directly at the King of England. And where did the king claim his authority? God. And behind the king saw the most powerful military the world had ever seen and said, "You're done. Get out." So let me tell you something, folks. That is power. That experience is, the only way I can really properly even think about it is fundamental self-respect. Because you see, it's one thing for one individual to be able to stand up and confront power like that, but let's be honest, when one person stands up to power, she or he is crushed almost immediately. The genius is if and when you can stand up and have some conviction and confidence that when I stand up, the sister's going to stand up, and the brother's going to stand up, and the sister's going to stand up, and we're going to all be standing up together, because collective action is the key, right? That's what movements have taught us time and time again. So, we know that the king does get thrown out, right? And so when the king gets thrown out, we're going to create a new government. No longer is the king the sovereign. And so a new charter gets written in order to be the supreme law of the land. What is that document called? We're taught the supreme law of the land, the governing document?
Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution. So very quickly, what I'm going to do is outline how the U.S. Constitution is supposed to operate. When you look at this document, what you'll see is two principal actors. The first actor is the most important actor. In fact, it begins this document. It's the first three words.
We the people.
We the people. I do this presentation all over the country. All I have to do is hold my hand up to my ears, and people will say in unison, "We the people." That's because those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. You see, we the people come together in order to create government. Government does not pre-exist us. We are creating it under this framework. We the people are described as being free and sovereign. And again, what does sovereign mean?
Power to rule.
The power to rule, the authority to rule. We're claiming the authority to rule. Government is not sovereign over the people. In fact, to the contrary, government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom?
Us.
The people. Government is accountable to whom?
Me.
Us, the people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? Let's keep going. I like how that feels. We the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government does not have rights. Government has duties. And this distinction is powerful and important. You see, if I have the right to do something, it means I can do it and I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need your individual permission. I don't need the city of Rochester's permission. I don't need the state of New York's permission. Look, y'all, I'm from Texas. I don't need my mama's permission. You know, if you've got the right to do something, if you have the ability to assert a right, that means that nobody can legitimately stop you from doing it. And check it out. If government tries to prevent you from exercising a fundamental right, government's wrong, not you. That's how important rights are. And duties is actually the opposite. Duties mean you have to do something even if you don't want to. And government only has duties. Where would those duties come from? Well, look, think of it this way. All power resides with the people. And by the way, power to the people was not just a Black Panther Party chant, although it was. It was also an American Revolutionary chant, right? It's the chant of almost every group of people who are actually trying to come together to actually confront illegitimate power. And in fact, those words I think are almost magic. And there's a reason the Panthers actually started their meetings that way. I mean, this was a group of people who were being systematically oppressed in this country by virtually every institution. And yet, they would start their meetings, whoever was facilitating or leading the meeting would say those four words, power to the people, the folks in attendance would say it back, and then they'd go about their business of feeding children or doing self-defense or doing whatever the work that they were doing. And that's because of powerful words. And to do that, or to underscore that, I'm going to do a little exercise. And if you are moved, if you'd be willing to, let's just try it together. I'll say those 4 words and invite you to say it back. I'll say, power to the people.
Power to the people.
I'm going to do it again. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
One last time. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
How does that feel? Yeah? Feels good, right? Right? You know, and every time I do this, people enjoy actually that process. And I think that what we're enjoying is not just the abstraction, it's saying it together and feeling that kind of sense of empowerment that, oh, we actually do have power. That's an amazing thing. All power resides with the people. That's amazing. But here's another question for y'all. What is the population of Rochester, New York? More or less. 200,000?
The city, 200. The area,
200,000. So let's just keep it to the city, 200,000. I got to tell you something, folks. I love the idea that the people of Rochester have the power of Rochester. But I'll tell you this. I don't want to go to the meeting of 200,000 people where we decide where the stoplights go. And I like political meetings. Right? Think of it this way. All the power may reside with the people, but we the people delegate a certain amount of that power to government. Why would we do that? In order to discharge the duties that we have already said government is supposed to be functioning. You see, properly understood here, the government is not supposed to lord over us. We the people are supposed to collectively make the big picture decision about how we want our society to operate, and then governmental agents, public servants, are supposed to administer that. They are supposed to discharge those duties. When you think of it this way, that this concept is brilliant, really, because what it says in the constitutional framework, we the people are free and sovereign, we have fundamental profound rights in our private realm. But it's not just the libertarian private impulses. There's also a public place, right? It satisfies our communitarian impulses. We, the people, have all the rights, but we expect government that is subordinate and accountable to us to perform the duties that we expect. I look at this and I think, this is brilliant. This is absolutely fantastic. Like we can have a civil libertarian impulse, don't tread on me as an individual, but there's also a communitarian ethos around how our society is operating. We're supposed to be collectively participating in the social contract. Isn't that fantastic? You know what? We should try that in this country. This would work. I'm not even joking, because the problem, folks, is not in this framework. The problem is that we've never actually experienced it. Because before I go 1 second further waxing poetic about the beauty of the U.S. Constitution, somebody tell me quickly what year the Constitution is ratified, if you know.
1787.
1787 is the Constitutional Convention. It gets formally ratified in 1789. It becomes the supreme law of the land. The reason I want that date certain is to now ask you, who is a legal person? Remember what legal personhood means? The ability to assert rights. Who was a legal person in 1789? What were their characteristics?
Male landlord.
Male landowners.
White.
White. That's kind of an important one.
Yeah, that's a...
Well, male, I mean, it's the same thing. Oh, no, they
No.
were not landowners.
Exactly. So you had to be white, you had to be a man, and you had to be a landowner. So here's a way to ask that question. What percentage of the adult U.S. population was legally a person in 1789? Anybody know?
25%.
25%? 9%? 1%. Sir, you're way, it's a clever answer. You know, we are the 99%. But 1% is far too cynical. It was 5%. 5% of the American population were actually fully legal persons. Another way to say that then is that 95% of the people were not legal persons. And that means that for all the brilliance of this framework, the founding of this country is a founding violence. Obviously against the indigenous people who were already here and were subject to intentional, deliberate genocide. And that's reality. We have to confront that. It's also a founding violence against the Africans who were brought at the barrel of a gun, at the point of a spear, and forced to build this country. Barack Obama occupies a White House built by enslaved Africans. That truth needs to be confronted. It's also a founding violence against women. Because it's not just that women couldn't vote. That's the least of it. Women couldn't even own property. Women were property by any reasonable understanding of that word. And it's a founding violence against most of the white men who didn't own sufficient property to actually be a fully functioning legal person. So one way to think about this, folks, and I want to be very clear about this, an incredibly important way to think about the U.S. history is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as legal persons with rights that will be protected and honored under the U.S. Constitution. Let's say that again because I think it's so important. An important way to think about U.S. history is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights under our Constitution. So some people might say, all right, Cobb, you got a scathing indictment against the corporation of 500 years ago in imperialism. But hey, man, women can vote. We got rid of slavery. It's all good. To which I say, au contraire, mon frere. It's not all good. Because now it's time to reintroduce the corporation. And very quickly I'm going to do that by saying to you, today, to create a corporation, all you have to do is file some paperwork with the Secretary of State. The state will issue you a charter. How long will your charter last? Indefinitely. What can you do with it? Under law, all things legally permissible. Some of us who pay attention say, well, it seems like you can do illegal things too and get away with it. Right? The reason I'm pointing this out is that these transnational corporations, which are the dominant institution of our times, are so easy to create. And yet, here's the problem. We almost have no way to really control them properly. And in 1789, to create a corporation, you had to get the state government to issue one. How? You had to prove a public need that was not being met by either private business or by governmental action. So you had to prove a public need, and if you were given the privilege, not the right, but the privilege of limited liability incorporation, all you could ever do is that very narrow thing that you had said you would do. And if you did anything else, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? It was revoked. And, by the way, how long would your corporate charter typically last? 5 years, 10 years, at which point it automatically dissolved. Oh, and by the way, if you ever acted outside the public interest, even if you were in that narrow time period, even if you were doing the narrow thing that you said you would do, if you acted outside the public interest, your corporate charter could be revoked.
Wasn't that the corporate death penalty?
That's exactly what it was, Ed. The corporate death penalty was imposed routinely. The point I'm making is this. To create a corporation requires an action of the state government. That corporate charter can be used to hold the corporation accountable. It can describe the duties of what a corporation could do. Properly understood, a corporation should only be allowed to exist if it serves the public interest. So a corporation, to really understand how our system is supposed to operate, must be on this side of the line. So when the U.S. Supreme Court comes waltzing in and says, oh no, a corporation must be considered like a person with rights, it perverts this whole framework. And that's the setup, folks. Corporate personhood is not just a stupid idea, which it is. Corporate personhood is not just illogical, which it is. Corporate personhood is a linchpin for how the ruling elite have hijacked our legal system from us. The place where we are supposed to, and we are trained and taught we go for justice and fairness, our legal system has been hijacked. And corporate lawyers can go into court and overturn democratically enacted laws that attempt to protect the environment, to protect the public safety and health, to protect the integrity of our elections. And that's why the Move to Amend campaign, I think, is so powerful. We are calling for an abolition of corporate personhood and an abolition of the illegitimate legal idea that money is speech. You take those two things together, you realize that's the foundation for how the ruling elite are actually legitimizing their continual oppression. And it's why I'm going to invite Occupy Rochester to please take up at either General Assembly or through one of your appropriate working groups, whatever the appropriate mechanism is, I request that you take up and do what other Occupies have done, and that is to demand, not just to request, but to demand that the United States Congress issue a proposed amendment to do those two things. Abolish corporate personhood and abolish the legal doctrine that money is speech. Because this movement is growing, and I'll conclude with this. We had gone, last time I was here, there was about 25,000 people participating. In less than a year, we've grown to 150,000 people participating. We had about 6 or 7 local chapters and affiliates. We now have about 35 local affiliates. We had plans to try to go through a resolution process and get this on the ballot. Since I was here last, we passed those resolutions in Madison, Wisconsin, in Dane County, in Humboldt County, in Boulder, Colorado, in Missoula, Montana, and we win those by roughly 75% of the vote every time we get it on the ballot. This is cutting across ideologies. Republicans are voting for it. Democrats are voting for it. Independents are voting for it. Greens are voting for it. It's cutting across ideology. 80% of the American people are with us on this. Right? That's the polling data, folks. So I'm going to conclude with this. The Rochester Move to Amend affiliate is growing. They've got a plan. I want to encourage you, if you are self-identify, believe, and think about yourself as a participant with the Rochester Move to Amend, would you please stand up in this crowd? Or I just want people to see. These are the folks who are doing the work, and I want to actually applaud them. Thank you very much. And those of you who didn't stand up, I'm going to invite you to make sure that you please sign up so that we can be in touch with you as we continue to move forward. There are plans underway, but I'm going to stop now and ask, did that make sense to folks? I mean, I know that I did this sort of, to tell 500 years of history, I hope I told an entertaining story. Right? I hope it makes sense as a story. So now I'll ask you, does anybody want to make a comment or ask a question about what we've just done? Yes, sir, Tom.
The variable that bothers me is when you inject fear into this rights duties matrix that you have here. So my read since 9/11 is that corporations, pardon my cynicism, have coupled themselves with governments to encourage fear. Because that does two things. It makes individuals want to give away their rights in order to be safe. And it sanctifies a group of people that we call heroes, police, fire, anybody that wears a uniform, and elevates them to a dangerous position that to me looks an awful lot like the early 1930s in Nazi Germany.
I'm glad you said that because I personally, Tom, believe that we need to get more comfortable with the F word in this country.
Fascism.
Fascism.
Yeah, I do too.
Because let me tell you something, Tom.
That's my point.
Let's be clear. Benito Mussolini said fascism, properly understood, should really be called corporatism.
Yeah.
Because it merges the military might of our nation with the economic might of our mighty corporations. And he thought that was a good thing.
Yeah.
He was a defender of it and a proponent. So yes, I think that what you're saying is absolutely true. We have to guard against that, and we have to understand this. And since you brought us to that question, here's my response. I genuinely believe that as primates, we're mostly motivated either by fear or love.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. And so we each have to start to search in our own hearts and ask, what is really motivating us? Because I'll tell you something, Tom. My experience has been that love is a stronger motivator.
Fear
You know?
of Nazis helps.
Yes. Fear of, yes. And but that's the other thing. Like, there are some things to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? I'm afraid of the global climate crisis. Right? There are things that are appropriate to be afraid of, but I appreciate you framing it that way. Yes, sister.
Further to what Tom raised, there was recently, this scared the hell out of me, where Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, and et cetera, had given, I think it was like a $46 million voluntary contribution to the New York City police.
How about that?
NYPD.
Yes.
4.6, still, that's a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
And doesn't that, I mean, why is that not illegal? How can they possibly serve the public if and it bought equipment for the police cars. So how can they be public servants and answerable to us, the taxpayer, if they're beholden to corporations for massive monies that impact their comfort, their operations, their, ability to do their job. Now they're serving, that's like so fucked up. It scares the hell out of me.
Well, it should scare you. I mean, and since that was obviously a rhetorical question, we won't bother to answer it because we know you can't expect the police to really serve the public interest under that.
I guess the question is, how did that happen?
Well, basically, 100 years of corporate history, and I got to say this, and I see your hand, sir. I would answer, how did that happen? We've let it happen. Honestly, we've let it happen. I mean, all of the atrocities that we're seeing today, we have to, if I'm correct that we're all jointly participating in our collective reality, then we have some responsibility. So, anybody else? 1, 2, anybody else? And we'll do one quick round here. So I've got 2 people on the stack. Anybody else? 3, Eddie, you'll be 3. Anybody else? So we'll do those 3 and then we'll take off because I want to be respectful of the venue. Yes, sir.
You sort of touched on my question because the legal and textbook definition of corporations, naive as it may be, is that it was formed so that you could have many investors and you had limited liability, and therefore this is the way you could get people to invest to create this wonderful thing. I don't know if it was built into it with all the deceit and everything else that came along, or did it evolve? And if that's the case, and you sort of alluded to it or stated it, we let it happen, right?
Yes.
Because in a pure sense, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And when you go from legal entity to a person, that is a stretch. And would you respond to legal entity as it was first defined?
Look, let's be clear about something. I mean, the idea of a corporation is a construct as a legal entity in order to simply facilitate people coming together collectively to do something. And that's not only fine, but that can actually be very positive. Let's put it this way. I know it may be hard here in November, but I'm going to ask you to imagine a hot summer day in Rochester. Can you do that with me? Yep. Hot summer day. And now, on that hot summer day, here I am, and my friend Dave Adius comes over, and he says, David, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm cutting this tomato. In fact, I'm making a fresh gazpacho soup, chilled tomato soup. It's so good. I know this recipe. I grew these tomatoes myself. It's going to be delicious. Dave, would you join me? Now, here's a question. Is that knife good or bad right now? Well, it's good, right? I'm making a soup. I'm going to share it with my friend. Now, imagine the same scenario. Hot summer day. Dave comes over, and he says, David, what are you doing? And I say, ah! And I come lunging at Dave Adius with the knife. Is the knife good or bad? It's a trick question, of course. The knife is neither good nor bad.
It's your behavior.
It's my behavior. It's my conduct. In the first scenario, good David Cobb. Right? Generous David Cobb. In the second scenario, homicidal David Cobb. Bad David Cobb. Murderous David Cobb. Right? The point is, and this is the thing, the corporation is just an instrument. It alone does not have any morality, either good or bad. Right? It is what we do with it. And in this case of the corporation today, I can name many corporate forms that are doing good things. Right? I can also name corporations that are engaged in horrible, atrocious activity. The problem is that we have allowed these entities to transform legal persons. Be clear about this. You see, if you as a person say your rights are being violated, you should be able to have a law overturned. The state should not have the power to infringe upon your rights. I mean, your rights are not created by the Constitution. Your rights are simply recognized by the Constitution because you have inherent, inalienable rights. Natural law rights. So the problem is not in the creation of the corporation. The problem is how we're treating it.
I would suggest that it isn't the corporation as much as it's our government, our Supreme Court, and our government in Washington lets it happen, etc., etc.
I think, look, we could spend a lot more time.
The evil is there.
Of course you're right about that. Of course you're right about that. And at the end of the day, though, we have responsibility for what we've allowed to be done in our name. Frankly, we could go down the list of the atrocities that this government has committed in our names. But I agree with you that the problem now is at the court. And I do want to say this. On January 21st is the three-year anniversary of that Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. I want to hopefully inspire y'all to come join us because that's a Saturday this year. So on Friday, January 20th, we're going to do another action. Occupy the courts. And especially for you of Occupy Rochester, we're inviting you to come along with us. We're going to be occupying federal district courts across the country. I'll be in Washington, D.C. at the United States Supreme Court. And I can also tell you now, we've just got confirmation. I'll be joined by Medea Benjamin of Global Exchange and Code Pink. And check this out, Tom Hartman is going to be joining us. And I just got word today, Professor Cornel West will be joining us.
Excellent.
That's in the U.S. Supreme Court. But guess what? Y'all have a federal district court here.
100 State Street, we'll be there.
100 State Street. So for those of you in Rochester, who will join me right now and say, I will participate? All right, look at that. Look at those hands going. Brother, I'm watching you. Where are you going to be on January 20th? Fair enough. Here's all I'm saying. That I agree it's the court system, and we've got to actually take this metaphorical fight to the courts and actually claim it back. Number two. Who is number two? This gentleman.
Oh, yeah, I've almost forgotten what I was going to say now, but I'll give it a shot anyway. Yeah, the times we're in right now sort of remind me of what was happening in Germany after World War I. The rise of Nazism in Germany seems to very much parallel the rise of fascism in this country. And the problem in Germany was there were a few people who saw what was happening and were demonstrating against it, and they were pretty well quashed. And my big fear is the same thing is going to happen to us, which is why you have coordinated efforts around the country to destroy the Occupy movement. I don't think it's any accident that Occupy Philly and Occupy LA were crushed in the same night. The problem I see is that most Americans are like most of the Germans during the 20s. They're either oblivious to or don't care about what is happening in this country. And I think we have a real problem because of what the psychologists call, let me think, cognitive dissonance. The vast majority of people in this country do not believe that we are a fascist country now because it would destroy their reality. How do we get around that?
You can explain to them what fascism is.
That's an important...
Yeah, I guess I would say this. It depends on who I'm talking to. Because if there's somebody who is absolutely committed, if they're sort of a Fox viewer, and are a USA chanter, and are unwilling to even engage in really thoughtful discourse, I have 4 magic words for such a person. Have a nice day. And I mean that very sincerely. I don't mean that in an ugly way. I mean it this way.
How about what's your source?
That's another good one. Yeah. But the reality is that most folks are not actually willing. There are some people who are not actually willing to actually engage in genuine dialogue. I think the strength of this movement is to reach out to those people who are currently cynical. They already agree with us in their heart, but they don't think that we can win. They don't think that there's anything that can be done. Our job is to inspire people into a loving, celebratory movement. To say we can actually win this thing. And we have to inspire them and show them and remind them of what they already knew. The American Revolution, the women's suffrage movement, the abolition of slavery, the trade union movement, the civil rights movement. Movements win! Right? Systemic fundamental change has happened in this country when ordinary people, just like you, whoever is watching this right now, when people like you get involved. And I'm going to actually ask you, if you're watching now, to go to the website movetoamend.org and sign up. Because that's not a petition that we're going to be begging our elected officials to do anything with. It is an organizing petition. Wherever you are, we will put you in touch with other people so that you can join this movement. We are going to win, and I want to be clear, we'll win in 10 to 15 years.